welcome to this special session by LLF on one of the greatest Urdu poets, Mirza Ghalib. And I'm delighted to host this session. I'm joined by two very eminent panelists and who actually need no introduction, but I shall introduce them nevertheless. So, the session is entitled as Ghalib, A Thousand Yearnings, and it is inspired by the famous couplet of Ghalib, Hazaro Khaishein, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. So Marion Molteno is a novelist who has joined us from the UK, and I'm also joined by Mr. Mahmood Jamal, who is an author, translator, and a filmmaker. And of course, the inspiration for this session comes from the engagement of Marion with Ghalib in her literary works, in particular her novel, a recent novel, in which she has not only used some of Ghalib's translated verse, but she's also worked with Russell,
Russell.
who's one of the finest translators of Ghalib. So without further ado, I would actually like to start with you, Marion, and ask you about your discovery of Ghalib and his poetry as you learned Urdu some years ago while teaching students, and how did that inspire you to use his translations in your novel?
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I was teaching English to people from India and Pakistan many years ago, and I felt it would be really appropriate if I learned one of their languages, at least made an attempt to learn one of their languages, so we were in an equal situation learning each other's languages. So I started trying to teach myself Hindi and got a little way, and then I met Ralph Russell, who was a well-known teacher of Urdu. And I saw from our first collaboration that he was an extremely unusual teacher, very, very immediate, direct, and really able to help people learn to speak. So I asked if he would teach me. So I switched from Hindi to Urdu and started having lessons with him. And my aim was simply to be able to have very basic conversations. And I've achieved that. I can have very basic conversations in Urdu. But what happened was sitting in his house once a week, having this lesson, chatting about things. Every now and then he would just quote something, which was clearly poetry. You could hear from the meter, and then he would translate it for me. And these little quotations from poetry were part of his everyday thought and speech. And from that, I got interested in Urdu poetry. I asked him to tell me about some of these couplets that he was quoting. And then he started telling me about the great poets, and his great life work was around Ghalib. So I learned a little bit more about Ghalib than the other poets. And I was just enchanted from the beginning, because it was so unusual for me, but it was also in a way so accessible, very difficult, but accessible in a way.
Okay, yes, accessible because some of the themes that Ghalib covers in his poetic works, I mean, are so universal.
Absolutely.
And you know, so and that's the beauty of Urdu poetry, and for that matter, even the classical Persian poetry, that the universal themes that they traverse are found in almost every culture and in every human's life. But tell us more about how you your engagement with the translated works. I mean, you obviously the translation part, we will come to that as well in this session. But your engagement with Russell and now you actually publish his works, and let us know a bit about that.
Okay. So I was in a very, very unusual situation. He had retired. And one of the reasons he'd retired a little bit early was he found that there are quite a lot of English speakers who were in contact with people from Pakistani and Indian communities who wanted to learn a little bit of the language. And he started running classes in the community. He had been a university teacher, but he felt it was really important to help people in the community communicate with each other. And he was suddenly overwhelmed with requests for these classes. So he pushed some of his more advanced students into helping him teach them. So even though my Urdu was very basic, there I was alongside him learning how to teach the basics of the language to other people. So I got sort of fast tracked into helping him, and then discovered that he had all of these wonderful articles he'd written over years, which had been published in rather obscure journals. And he had 2 or 3 published books, but most of the stuff was not published. So I started pressing him to get it published, and he found publishers, and I started editing it. And you know, I could edit it because it was in English. He was writing in English about Urdu poetry, explaining it to English speakers. So I didn't need an advanced knowledge of Urdu to be able to edit it. What I needed was to understand what he was trying to say. And he used me as a kind of a foil, like if Marion can't understand what I'm getting at, then I haven't explained it clearly enough. So we worked together like that during his last 25 years of his life.
Right, right. Okay.
And
Yeah, please go on.
well, it just, as he was getting near the end of his life, he realized that actually somebody would have to manage the process of his books after his death. So he asked me if I would be his literary executor. So what that means is I work with publishers to try to keep his books in print and edit new collections and so on.
Wonderful. So I'll go to Mahmood Sahab, and Mahmood Sahab, you have also translated a lot of Persian verse and Sufi poets, and I believe you are working on translating some of Ghalib's poetry. So tell us a bit about that, about the process, because I mean translation is a very complex sort of undertaking. And also, but it is also very important as Marion's work and her understanding and engagement with Ghalib sort of testifies.
Yes, I mean, I'm also familiar with Ralph Russell, and also met him many, many times. And he was a great, one of the best interpreters of Ghalib in English that I've ever come across. Of course, now the work is being done by Francis Pritchett in Colombia. But Ralph Russell was a wonderful man. And from his books, I learned a lot about the life of Ghalib, the historical background, etc., which I had not read before, or I had been familiar with it only in oral tradition, you see, because I was brought up in a world of poetry and Urdu, and I've lived with Ghalib all my life, virtually. So in terms of translating, I did a book called Penguin Book of Modern Urdu Poetry, which was not classical poetry. I deliberately avoided the ghazal because it is one of those things that is very, very difficult to translate. And to have a whole book of ghazals sounded like an enormous task to me, and it would take a long time. So recently, I had done 50 poems of Faz. So I proposed to OUP, Pakistan, that I would like to do 50 poems of Ghalib, 50 poems of Iqbal, which is coming before that. And since I started translating Ghalib, I realized, first of all, Ghazal is almost impossible to translate anyway as a whole. So one has to select couplets which one feels one can tackle. It's not just a difficulty in interpreting the culture and the values and the burden of meaning that each word may contain, but also the problem of the rhyme and rhythm, because Urdu Ghazal is not something you just read off a page. That is the problem, because it is the whole tradition is, though it is written in divans and all that, but the recitation, the rhythm, the sound, the meters play a very big role. Because if you look at the ghazal itself, if you define it, it is only one characteristic or two, which is that it must have a rhyme, it must be metrically sound. And that the only way, I mean, you can do it with scanning and this and that, scansion, but really listening to it is the real thing. because even poets from old times, classical times, always it was the mushaira where the test came in a way. In translating, it's almost impossible to convey the sound. You can convey the meaning. So those ghazals or verses which are very strong in obvious meanings are the easiest to translate. And when I started translating any ghazal of Ghalib, I came across something that I just couldn't tackle, apart from the music and the thing, and you can't translate Urdu rhymes into English rhymes because it doesn't seem to quite work. I mean, we've seen in translation, great works of Persian done very well, but then you lose all the meaning and you just remember the English rhyme. It is not equivalent to the Farsi rhyme, for example, Fitzgerald. That difficulty is there. I've attempted, let's say, I'm not happy with any of them, about 10, 12 ghazals of Ghalib. Uh, and I've tried first to do it, in terms of each, as Ralph Russell in his book found a good way out, that he said he translated just single couplets most of the time, because that is much more you can handle that, because also the ghazal, one of the characteristics of ghazal is that each couplet could have a completely independent
Yeah.
meaning. So you wonder why this guy is saying one thing 1 minute and another thing another. That is the beauty of the ghazal. In
Yes.
fact, its real strength. The beloved is never identified, whether it's male, female, human, God, you don't know. So that's part of the, how do you convey that. So it's a difficult job,
Yeah.
translating ghazal.
Yeah.
So I attempted about 10 ghazals. I can give you a sample of one of them, I, but it's for me it's much better to look at Ghalib and in terms of uh, his whole ideas that he was trying to tackle. That he himself found ghazal uh, ghazal insufficient to handle his ideas. He said the qadre shauq nahi, zarf tangnaye ghazal, kuch aur chahiye wusat mere bayan ke liye. You mean that the ghazal, I'm not just doing it because I like the restriction of the ghazals. I'm just translating verbatim, uh, but I need a larger
Another
canvas
form.
for
Yeah.
my ideas. So Ghalib was one of those poets who wanted to make people think, not just feel, and that is his uniqueness in a way. Anyway, I don't know where we are with this.
Yeah. So
It's a
we'll
vast.
certainly ask you to recite some of your recent translations, maybe in a bit.
Yeah.
I'll get back to Marian, and I want to, So I think the most interesting part of this conversation is how difficult the ghazal as a form is, because of given the fact that it is every couplet is supposed to be a universe of meaning in itself, and then within a couplet there could be layers and layers of meaning. I mean, as you said, is it the divine love, is it your beloved, human beloved, is it, and sometimes even words are used and employed in such a manner that translation has to be extra careful, because it has to somehow encompass all shades, or at least a few shades of the meaning that every phrase or word implies. But coming back to you, Marian, I mean, I was very curious when we talked the other day about your recent novel, um, um, The Uncertain Light, it's called, right? And
There you go.
yes, there you go, Uncertain Light. And this is the novel where you have included some of Ghalib's verse, and you what was the feedback of readers who are not acquainted with Urdu language, or who may not even know who this guy Ghalib was, the
Well,
19th.
it was very, it was very interesting. And I just want to, before I just go into that, just agree with Mahmoud Saab that the real problem for English speakers, if they read a ghazal in translation, is this form, that it is a convention that you have a number of couplets in one poem and they have the same rhyme scheme and the same meter that makes them a poem, but each couplet has an independent meaning. If you abandon that and you just take the couplets one at a time, they have very strong and very clear meanings. And that's what I was able to do in my novel. There is a central character who grows up in an Urdu-speaking environment, as Mahmoud said, with the poetry all around him, his father reciting it, his friends reciting it, and knowing all about it. And so it's a big thing in his head. And then he is in a relationship with a young woman who doesn't know anything about that. And he, in order to try to share some of those thoughts, he translates some of those couplets, the ones that he really likes, that he thinks are very pointed reflect his own situation. And in a way, I think what really appealed to people who were reading it was this way that poetry was an expression for him of what he was going through at that time. And that you could take just this 2 lines of verse and it could make a really strong point. And I got lots and lots of people writing saying, I haven't really ever particularly been involved with poetry. I don't write poetry, I don't read it very much, but I really love the poetry in your story. And I think that was possible because it came in tiny little bits, which really meant something for the character in the story. It could really mean something for you.
Right.
So, and I think some of them are actually translatable. So there's one, hum wahan hai jahan se humko bhi kuch hamari khabar nahi aati. It's a very ironic little thought. In English, Ralph has translated it, I am so far away that even I have not the least awareness where I am. It's a kind of a little conceit, where the hell am I? What is he talking about? And it's something which at a certain moment in your life, you might think, well, where am I? What's going on in my life? I just don't know what's going on. And if you've grown up with the poetry being recited around you, this little couplet will come to mind and you'll use it that way. So I think it was that use of poetry in somebody's life that appealed to people.
Yes.
So on that note, you see, like people who are brought up in the culture of Urdu poetry or Farsi poetry or mushairas, they have thousands of ashar in their heart for just this kind of situations.
Yeah.
So we who are kind of brought up, my parents were a great influence on me in that whenever something occurred, there was also always a share to recite. And my father, of course, who knew whole divans by heart. Because he was a hafiz, so he must have at least known 500,000 ashar by heart. I've managed, I think, about 25,000 so far. But it's,
You've
just
counted them, Mahmoud Saab. You counted them. I couldn't even count to 25,000.
No, I haven't counted, but I'm making a rough estimate.
Yes.
Must
So
be at least.
Yeah.
So you live. So poetry, for some people, poetry is a way of life. It's not just a study.
So someone from the audience is saying, is asking us to repeat the name of the novel, and it's called Uncertain Light. Maybe you can show it again, Marion.
I don't know if you can see Uncertain Light.
Yes.
If you're interested, I would be obviously delighted if you'd like to read it. You put my name into Google and you will find my website, which will have information.
Wonderful. And going back to Ghalib, so what is that makes Ghalib so unique, Mahmoud Saab, in the sense that, Ghalib's contemporaries were also great poets in their own right. From Momin and Zauq and Bahadur Shah Zafar, even, some of his verse, and his predecessors. But it is Ghalib has attained that kind of a unique stature within this mid to late 19th century Urdu poetry. And I would like to explore that a bit. I have a few thoughts of mine, but this is not about me. I've talked to you.
No, I mean, you might spark off few ideas, But I would say there are certain things about Ghalib which I think are wonderful and unique. Um, One of them is that his engagement with the world, uh, and that despite the sorrows of the world, he engages in a way which brings a smile on your face, which is like he expresses the worst kind of calamity with a kind of wit and irony that is unique. Second thing is that he traversed the classical and at that time the modern world uh, of his time, and he embraced them both with equal enthusiasm. He never just looked back. He gave us moments to reflect on ideas and on life and on death, and the most important thing, his great love for life. Go हाथ को जुम्बिश नहीं, आंखों में तो दम है, रहने दो अभी सागर और मीना मेरे आगे. I mean, nothing can express better, although I do not have the strength in my hands, at least my eyes can see, leave the wine glass and the wine before me. So this expression of the passion for living, despite the sufferings and the calamities that he himself went through, and the destitution, etc. Uh, these make him unique in a way. But his own language, he never settled for the easy way. He made some people, even at the time, complain that his poetry was too difficult. He was not writing goya mushkil, vagarna goya mushkil, he himself said. And it was like he wanted us to engage with poetry in a way which nobody else, I mean, other people had done it before, but nobody took such a pride and such a kind of seriousness with which Ghalib approached poetry, where he thought that, so his poems make you want to think also apart from feeling, because the primary purpose, as far as I'm concerned, poetry is emotional, to feel and to recognize what we consider to be the truth or the reality. And the Ghalib went beyond that and wanted to go into traverse other grounds. So he almost like forces you in a way, and it's deliberate. He did not want to just follow what had gone before, take what was before and give it a new turn. And that is his uniqueness. And he, in spite of being now more than 150 years ago, he still gives us things which we can quote, we can think about. For example, after the Black Lives Matter thing started in America, after the man was murdered, Floyd, I posted on my Facebook a Ghalib share. कि मेरे कत्ल के बाद उसने जफा से तौबा हाय उजूत पशेमा का पशेमा होना. So it was,
give us just give listeners a quick translation of that, Mahmoud.
After murdering me, my tormentor is lamenting, or is repentant. How quickly he repents. In other words, irony is that this has been going on for a long time in America. Now, why suddenly after killing me, you start repenting about it? So that is Ghalib's uniqueness, and his laughing at calamity, I think, brings us very close to him, because it gives us a joyful life.
Yes.
Anyway, that's my
No, that's
But there are many other things he did technically with the language we could discuss. But I was just giving you the
Well,
most.
I think one of the, I mean, that couplet is an example of how he achieves that with quite simple words. I mean, he's described as a difficult poet, and when I was certainly when I was learning to appreciate his poetry, I had to sit. You know, my lessons were we would sit, Ralph and I would sit together, and we would have the Urdu and the English translation, and word by word, he would unpick it and explain how this word has a double meaning, and therefore, so it's complicated. But sometimes with extremely simple words, he gets a complex meaning across. And that one is an example. And I think, you know, another one is Ishq se tabiyat ne. Would you like to recite it for us, Mahmoud Saab?
Which is
Ishq se tabiyat ne zist ka maza paya. दर्द की दवा पाई पाई दर्द
इससे
की बैद
तबीयत ने
जी
इसका मजा पाया, दर्द की दवा पाई, दर्द बेदवा पाया.
Yeah, and for English speakers who are listening to this, I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that out of millions of couplets, I can quote one, and Mahmoud Saab can immediately know which one I'm quoting and can recite it. It is a famous one, but still. So the English goes, love taught my nature what it is to know the zest of life. I found a cure for sorrow in a sorrow without cure. So all of those words are so simple. There's nothing complicated. They're all very basic Urdu words that, you know, you learn in a beginner's course, but he uses them in this way where he turns the thought back on itself. I'm just going to say it one more time because it's hard to take in very quickly. Love taught my nature what it is to know the zest of life. I found a cure for sorrow in a sorrow without cure. And love is the sorrow without cure if it's not requited love. Yeah. But it can be love at any level. It can be love for a beloved. It can be a commitment that you're involved in that is unrewarding in the end. It causes you sorrow. All that you put into it doesn't reward you. It can be on all of those levels.
Exactly. No, and it's a wonderful translation as well, by the way. So, you know, just picking on this, I think just to add also the fact that you mentioned all about his sorrows. So he was living in these tumultuous times. You know, in 1857, the War of Independence in India, I mean, completely changed lives of people in Delhi. And Ghalib was one of those persons who lost everything. I mean, who was in the middle of this tumult going on, and yet we see that, you know, he not only survives that, but, you know, that even enriches his poetic sensibilities. You know, what he was composing during that time and afterwards, and then his letters. Somebody's even asked a question about Ghalib's because we are talking about his verse, but, you know, Ghalib is also in many ways the pioneers of modern Urdu prose. And that comes unintentionally because through his letters, which completely discarded the old formal way of addressing with very flowery language and high sounding praises that you do to everyone in the classical Urdu or Persian style. So he completely dispensed with that and was very direct, very ironic, you know, much like his poetry, lots of wit, humor, and a complete, as Mahmoud Sahab was saying, even laughing at his own sorrows. So he would say, "I'm miserable," ha ha ha. You know, it's that kind of narration, and that has inspired a whole you know, movement for a new kind of prose in Urdu language. You know, towards the end of 19th century and then 20th century. So I want to also get to, because taking advantage of the fact that Mahmoud Saab is on this panel and he has translated some of the Persian poets, or whom are being called Sufi poets these days for the lack of a better introduction. So Ghalib's poetry, like his contemporaries and like other masters in Urdu, also deals with a lot of mystical subjects and explorations into sort of the questions of divine and metaphysics. So, Mahmood Sab, tell us a bit about that.
Well, Ghalib, I mean, as I said earlier, all Urdu and Farsi poetry is imbued with a certain Sufi ideas. Sufi is a very un, uncomfortable term for me, but those were the philosophical ideas of the times and of the language and of the culture. Um, and since ghazal poetry and poetry in general is there's a lot of about love, and since it's a central theme in just not just uh, poetry but in philosophical aspects of Sufi thought, and the idea of existence, all these things come into Ghalib also, you know. And uh, and Ghalib does that in many different poems. There are some very striking Sufi ideas in Ghalib. I mean, one famous share which probably a lot of people know is "न था कुछ तो खुदा था, कुछ न होता तो खुदा होता, डुबोया मुझको होने ने, न होता मैं तो क्या होता." When there was nothing, there was God. If there was nothing, then God would remain. My misfortune that I am. If I were nothing, I wonder what I would be. You know. So this idea of questioning the creation and creator, and being, you know, this idea that of Wahdatul Wujud, which is that the unity of being, Ibn al-Arabi and people like that have expounded, uh, is reflected in this share. The other thing is, of course, the figure of Mansur Hallaj plays a role in Islamic civilization, sometimes a very dark one, and sometimes very. And Ghalib has a new take on Mansur. But with this also is mystical idea. Qatra apna bhi haqiqat mein hai darya, lekin this drop is also in reality an ocean, but I'm not so mean in spirit as to follow Mansur. हमको तकलीद तुनुक ज़र्फ़ी मंसूर नहीं. In other words, I can also say I'm God, because Mansur is famous for saying an al-haq, which he didn't mean I'm God, but anyway, that's the way it's been interpreted. You
Right?
know, so qatra apna bhi haqiqat mein hai darya, lekin हमको तकलीद तुनुक ज़र्फ़ी मंसूर नहीं. Another example, कतरा दरिया में जो मिल जाए तो दरिया हो जाए. This idea of the drop in the ocean is a very Sufi idea. You know, the soul joining the creation to become eternal. You know, this drop is so काम अच्छा है वो जिसका माल अच्छा है. The work, it doesn't matter which way you do it, as long as you have good intentions and good results, is good work. You know, uh, and then of course the other mystical thing is that the world is an illusion, and what we see is a reflection of, of the creator in this world. So so Ghalib writes a puzzling question, कह सके कौन कि ये जलवागरी किसकी है? This manifestation of beauty, whose is it? Who can tell me? पर्दा छोड़ा है वो उसने कि उठाए ना बने. That this image of the world that we see, the creation that we see, the flower, the bird, everything that we see, is in fact a curtain which hides the reality from us, but we see it as the reality. So it's also both an alluring illusion, and also behind it lies something else. You see? So these are some examples. And then another, the world is an illusion. हाँ कहो मत फरेबे हाँ खाओ मत फरेबे हस्ती है हर चंद कहें कि है नहीं है. Do not get into, do not be fooled by 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 being that whatever they say it is not. What is apparent is not. So love world is an illusion, uh, like the idea of this phenomenal world is an illusion.
But it's interesting because you were saying earlier that one of the real appeals of Ghalib is that he's so passionate about life, that he's so engaged with life. So he doesn't actually, in his life and in much of his poetry, he doesn't act like it's an illusion at all. It's very real for him, and he captures that reality. So there's a kind of a sense that there must be some double meaning involved when he talks about it as an illusion. That it's almost like at a level of a more realistic level than many of the metaphysical poets would see it.
That's why I don't consider Ghalib necessarily what I would classify as a mystical or Sufi poet. He was a very worldly poet, a very secular poet, but he did have occasions of, because all poets have that, not just Ghalib, have that dimension, a spiritual dimension of existence. I mean, Ghalib was very much rooted in the world, and he very much a man of secular intent.
Yes.
But obviously, these are philosophical ideas which he's dealing with, and all philosophy, particularly in the East, has had these themes running right through it. It's those aspects that when he says ये मसाइले तसव्वुफ ये तेरा बयान गालिब तुझे हम वली समझते जो नबादा खार होता. Now he's ironic again. He said
just
that
give us a quick English translation of that for listeners who don't know Urdu.
These issues of tasawwuf and
metaphysics
and your explanation. No, tasawwuf. He said masale tasawwuf, not metaphysics. ये masale tasawwuf. ये तेरा बयान गालिब.
So
the tasawwuf
more like mysticism. These issues
mystical.
And तुझे हम वली समझते, we would consider you a saint had you not been a drinker. So he puts his foot firmly into this earth, and then हर चंद सुबुकदस्त हुए बुझ शिकनी में हम हैं तो अभी राम है संग गिरा और. So that's a very Sufi idea, that the ego, we are very quick to break idols, but as long as that idol of the self is there, we have got other things, other mountains to cross, if you like.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the context is that while unlike others, I mean, Ghalib was not. He was very much engaged with life and had this zest for living, but he was raising these very fundamental questions that had baffled poets, his predecessors and the Persian masters that he used to follow, about life, about what is human existence, what is your relationship with the universe, what does it all mean? I mean, what does the idea of being alive or existing mean? So I think in that sense, he did cover all of that ground, but I think, Mahmood Sahab, you're right that he was not a conventional, like Khaja Mir Dard or others. I mean, the poetry is far more, I would say, diverse and than them. So going back to this, Marian, I mean, about your readings, and as you were working with one of the foremost translators, and also, picking on these themes and ideas in Ghalib's verse. I mean, how do you see? I mean, how did they personally connect with you? And obviously, for a novelist, it has to first inspire and influence you before it gets into the characters, right?
Well, I think in a way, what first intrigued me was how closely Ralph identified with some of the poetry. He was a Westerner, and until the age of 20, he had absolutely no contact with Urdu. He was conscripted into the army in the Second World War and sent to India. And like all British officers in the Indian Army, he was given a an opportunity to learn Urdu, but most of them didn't take it seriously. He did take it seriously because he was a very dedicated communist in the 30s, and he wanted to be able to talk to the soldiers in his unit, and he also wanted to be able to listen to their political ideas and possibly encourage them to think about throwing off the British yoke and all of those things. So he was a very, very unusual British officer in the Indian Army. But as a result of his very close relationships with people there, when he came back at the end of the war, he wanted to study the language properly, and he went to SOAS and did a degree in Urdu. And he has described in some of his earlier writing how very difficult he found it to identify with the poetry at the beginning. However much he studied it, it just seemed to be from a completely different cultural viewpoint. But he came to feel that this, I think it was this intense sense of commitment that Ghalib gives, about which Mahmoud Saab has talked about, that it was very similar to his intense political commitment. He felt, when you use the word communist today, it implies people have very strong connections with the Soviet Union and all the things that went wrong there. For Ralph, it was basically a kind of humanism. He was a very strong egalitarian. He really believed in the equal humanity of all people and wanted people to be able to be close to each other. And because he grew up in the 1930s, he was very influenced by the ideas of communism. But he was basically concerned with human beings being able to understand and respect and connect with each other. And he would have done anything to make that happen, to help that happen. And that sense of commitment that he felt to an ideal, if you like, he found that reflected in Ghalib's poetry. He found that intensity, that dedication, and it was expressed conventionally in the Urdu ghazal as a love poem towards a beloved. But his interpretation was this beloved can be anything that you are committed to. And because the Urdu ghazal has a very wide point of reference, it's not specific, as Mahmoud said, it doesn't talk about one particular person that you love. You can actually, it's very free for you to interpret it. And Ralph just found endless points of contact between the thoughts that poets express, particularly Ghalib and Mir, and what he felt about life, which is why he would quote it. And that's why people do quote these things, because as Mahmoud gave the example from the Black Lives Matter, whatever happens to you, if you're brought up with the poetry and you've got it there, whatever happens to you, you can find a verse in a poem, which actually throws some light on it. And it's a very wonderful kind of sense of reflecting and thinking that it happens. So for me, in a way, it was observing somebody from a Western culture becoming so absorbed and open to a different culture. I found that very inspiring. And I could tag on after it. It wasn't me who did it, it was him who did it, but I could reflect that in my story.
Yes. No, it's extremely well put, and also the way you've described Russell's own engagement with this work. It's fascinating, actually. I didn't know about the communist part. Maybe I missed from his early writings. So there's a question from the audience about the books that one should read to know about Ghalib. I presume books in English it would be. Mahmoud Saab has mentioned Ralph Russell and Khurshidul Islam, Ghalib, Life and Letters. That's about his book. And also, Marian, do you have some suggestions from Russell's long list of publications?
Yeah, this is a recent edition.
That's the book
Yeah, so this is a recent edition that I put together of Ralph's writings about Ghalib. So it's done in a way which is very easy for non-Urdu speakers. If you can see that page, each couplet is there in Urdu script. The same couplet is written again in Hindi script, because there are many people in India who understand spoken Urdu, but they don't read it, but they could read the Hindi script. It's written again in English letters, so you get the sound of it. An English speaker can read the English letters and get something of the sound, and then there's a translation. So that's why there are 4 for each couplet. So it's a collection of couplets that Ralph chose to translate. And like Mahmoud Saab said, he only translated the ones he thought were possible to translate. So there were quite a lot he liked, but he couldn't manage a translation.
Yes.
And then at the front part of the book is a text which I have edited from many different things that Ralph wrote about Ghalib. I brought them together in a kind of a logical sequence. So it's an introduction to the poetry. But Ghalib Life and Letters, the one that Mahmoud Saab referred to, is an excellent it's a biography of Ghalib through as much as possible through his own words, quotations from his letters.
Wonderful. Thank you,
Yeah,
Marian.
I think for English readers, that Ghalib book that you just showed, I think is also really worth reading, by Ralph Russell. The Ghalib book that you just showed, yeah. It's really.
And again, if it's gone too fast for you, if you'd like to read it, you will find the details on my website.
Lovely. Thank you, Marian. And I think we are very close to the end of this session. But I would then, I haven't forgotten, Mahmoud Saab, you have to recite some of your recent translations. So you can't escape that.
Well, I can read you one attempt. I can't say it's a great translation, but what I would like to do is I'll read the translation. This is my initial kind of like, you can say, work in progress. And you can guess the original if you want. It's just English. And I tried to do it in couplets. It was not my fate to gain union with my love. Had I lived longer, I would yearn some more. Your promises
Yeah.
Your promises are fine, but I knew untrue. I'd die of happiness if I believed in you.
Oh, that's good.
तेरे वादे पर जिए हम तो ये जान झूठ जाना.
Your mixed messages play with my heart. It'd be best if you shot your arrow through and through. What friends are these that offer me advice? They show no sympathy, nor help me in my plight. If sorrow is a killer, there's no escape from it. If not love's pain, then life itself will take its toll. How can I describe, my friend, this sorrowful night? If it were once to die, I would gladly give my life. Who can see him? He is alone, unique. To comprehend him would take away his oneness. These mystical thoughts and your explanations, Ghalib, had you not been a drinker, you would be considered a saint. I mean, this is just a simple. You see, but first of all, I've got to explain something, that my attitude to translation and to poetry in general, and that is why some poems, some verses of Ghalib, I don't particularly get bowled over by, is that for me my approach is always conversational in both my original poetry and my translation.
Yes.
So it.
No, it is a, but this is a great start, Mahmoud Saab. Please continue, because we need more and more. I mean, there's so much of his corpus from his work which is yet to be translated. So you could perhaps give it. I mean, especially his Persian poetry, which Ghalib was very proud of, and which sadly a lot of Urdu readers like myself are not very well acquainted with. And he used to, Ghalib used to say it again and again, that, my real verse and my real, sort of distinction is my Persian poetry.
Sure.
And that sadly, a lot of us who were not schooled in Persian or Farsi language could not really access. So I think we can, there's one last question from somebody in the audience, and that is, please suggest resources to read Ghalib's poetry in Urdu, which include commentary on the poetry to understand the context.
Yes, well, there's a big thick book. There are several actually. In Urdu, there's I think Ghulam Rasul Beher's book on Ghalib, Nawai Sarosh, and that has all the ghazals, all Ghalib's works basically, and it has explanations. Then there is recently Rekhta has published a whole thing about Ghalib, where they explain the verses and the meanings in Urdu. It's all in Urdu. So Nawai Sarosh is one of my favorites. Anyway, there may be many more, but that's what I sort of know, have used and learned from.
There are others.
But nothing like a person who can tell you
Yes.
and explain,
yes,
So I've been fortunate enough to have people like Bari Mia and my friend Wajid Jawad who are experts on these. So if I have any difficulty, I just ask them and they try to explain it to me.
right, right. So, and I think I missed this question as well. This is and this is for you, Mahmood Saab. Can you please explain Ghalib's idea of bekhudi, like in his verse, "मैं से गरस निशात है किस रूह से आको, एक गुनाह बेखुदी मुझे दिन रात चाहिए." So,
bekhudi, we all want bekhudi, but of course, Iqbal would disagree.
yes.
But bekhudi here means, in a way, freedom from the chains of existence and what I would call sanity or conformity. As Ghalib said, you see, you can escape a lot of things by being a bit eccentric in life, not having always to conform. Ghalib said that bekhudi besabab nahi Ghalib. My inebriation is also a kind of bekhudi or intoxication or lack of self of where I am and what am I doing. So bekhudi besab is not without purpose. Kuch to hai jiski pardadari hai. I mean, there is something which I'm trying to hide from you all. That's why I'm behaving in a way that I am, So bekhudi. So here there's another version of that, is that maise garaz nishat hai kis rusiya ko. He's saying I'm drinking to get drunk so that I'm free of my sorrows and pains and the worldly existence. So I'm not looking for a pleasure from wine. You see, I want to be drunk all the time, as Baudelaire also said. Be drunk. Be drunk means to be not be chained to convention and to the everyday necessities of life. I hope I've explained this. Explain the idea of bekhudi. Here he's saying bekhudi. You see, maise garaz nishat hai. Which crazy guy would want to get pleasure from wine? My purpose is to get drunk and be kind of freed of my sorrow and my pain and my existence.
So it's a kind of a drinking into oblivion. It's just
yes,
yeah.
But he didn't quite mean oblivion, but rather a very beautiful space where you don't have to worry about what other people are thinking about you or saying about you or wondering about you.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's very apt of Ghalib to say that.
Indeed.
Because I think every now and then we all need that.
We do. And so I think we could bring this to a close. Marian, do you want to end with a note or anything you want to add from?
I'm just thinking.
And I forgot to ask. So.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about the verse you were just talking about, Mahmood Saab. I seem to remember reading it in Ghalib Life and Letters in a way where he was really miserable and talking very seriously and saying, what crazy guy would drink for pleasure, in a way that he could not find pleasure. Life was so miserable at that point. So it wasn't like going into a happy space. It was like oblivion in the sense of I have to forget about, and at moments like this in the world, that is a verse that I would find very apt. When we see what's going on with Trump in America, and with country after country, absolutely vile kind of hatred between groups of people, you just feel, Christ, I need oblivion. I just need something that's going to take me away from this, you know. Somebody put something up on Facebook about my desire to stay informed at the moment is in complete contradiction to my desire to stay sane. And you know, you don't want to stay informed about all of these things. You want oblivion from them.
There's a very apt couplet of Ghalib's.
Yeah.
कोई उम्मीद भर नहीं आती, कोई सूरत नजर नहीं आती.
Exactly.
Just
for
lockdown,
translate
there's
it.
a perfect one.
Yeah,
कोई सूरत नजर नहीं आती. Of course, he's using double meaning here.
Yeah.
कोई सूरत, no way, or कोई some face, you know.
Yeah.
कोई उम्मीद भर नहीं आती, कोई सूरत नजर नहीं आती.
It's like there is no hope. I see no light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I would like to conclude with my one of my, I mean, there are many favorites, but you know, this particular couplet is, and I'm sure both of you must have come, I mean, Mahmood Sahab certainly knows about it. है कहाँ तमन्ना का दूसरा कदम यारब, हमने दश्ते इम्कान को एक नक्शे पाया. And so it's a couplet which kind of entails the immense possibilities of the universe in just a very short couplet. Maybe you can translate it better, you know.
No, I can't. No, but I have a Hafiz share, which this reminded me of, which is that Kasna danas ki manzil gahe maashuk kujas. Nobody knows where the destination of love is. Kasna I qadaras ki awaaz jaras mein aayat. Only we know the sound of the caravan bells, which is also similar in kind of intent to what you have just said.
Yes.
It's just footsteps on the way to somewhere else, you know.
So, you know, like it's so difficult to translate this one, but I mean, something like, you know, where is the second step of longing?
Yeah.
Because the desert of possibility is but a mere footprint on the sands of time. So if I may add that, so it's just the idea that, you know, we don't know enough, and we are in this complete and constant quest for understanding the universe and the meaning of life, and he brings that whole uncertainty so well. So I guess we can conclude this, and thank you.
Let me the correct message. I qadaras ki bange jarase mein aaya. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Thank you. So, Marian, thank you so much, and Mahmood Sahab, I truly enjoyed this you know, conversation. Thanks to LLF.
The pleasure was mine.
Yeah, and I must add something that, you know, LLF is doing something very unique. I mean, of course they are, but you know, in particular on Ghalib, I was extremely excited because in Pakistan, Ghalib has, while everybody acknowledges his brilliance and his towering stature in Urdu poetry, but you know, he has been kind of shunned a little bit because he's seen more like an Indian, because India kind of owns Ghalib, and anything that India owns we have to disown. So it's one of those, but of course that's the power of civilization, language and culture, that you can't really bring these walls. But I must thank LLF for having this conversation, because it, you know, how can you understand Urdu language, the world, yourselves without knowing Ghalib?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,